رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. O my Lord, open up my chest for me, make easy to me my affair, loose the knot from my tongue that they may understand my words. My brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum. Today, inshallah, in this video, we're just gonna talk about an overview of the arteries and veins of the thorax and the neck, kind of. And we're also, inshallah, going to talk about, just briefly, some of the landmarks that are important to know. I'm using the app Essential Anatomy 5. Special thanks to the team, to the 3D4 Medical company, who has put together this great app for medical students. Now let's bring it on. I'd like to begin from the major arteries and veins, just as a review. By the way, let's hide this guy. Okay, so now, as we know, this is the heart. So this is the aorta. This is the superior vena cava. This is the inferior vena cava. And over here, this is the pulmonary trunk. Of course, it will divide into the right and left one. This is the left pulmonary artery, and also to the right, which is not very obvious here. And this is the superior and inferior pulmonary veins to the left again. So the pulmonary artery, as we know, or basically the pulmonary trunk, takes deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle of the heart into all the way into the lungs to be oxygenated, and then the oxygenated blood through the pulmonary veins will enter the left atrium of the heart, and then of course it will go to the left ventricle, and finally to the aorta. Okay, so this is the aorta. Of course, it has got some parts. This is the ascending aorta because it's going upwards. It's called ascending. And this is the arch of aorta. It's arching like that. It's arching. And then we've got the thoracic aorta. This is it, because it's situated in the thorax. And then we've got the abdominal aorta. This is the abdominal aorta because, again, it's situated in the abdomen. Now it's important to talk about some openings in the diaphragm, just as a review. So let's get the diaphragm here. Okay, this is the diaphragm. We've got three major openings in the diaphragm. So let's also get the digestive system here. Okay, let's actually hide this guy. Alright, now as we know, this is the esophagus, this is the stomach. Okay, so here, this is the caval opening at the level of T8, and then we've got the esophageal opening at the level of T10, and finally we've got the aortic opening at the level of T12. So when the thoracic aorta passes through this aortic opening, it will become the abdominal aorta. So that's the concept you have to understand. Alright, so now back to the major vessels. So now let's talk about the superior vena cava. This is the superior vena cava, and as we said, this is the inferior vena cava, which passes through the caval opening. But anyway, this is the right and left brachiocephalic veins. Now it's important to know that this is the division of the major veins to the right and to the left. Now it's important to know that the divisions are exactly the same, but it's not the case for the arterial division, which we'll talk about later on. But anyway, this is the brachiocephalic vein, and this has got two major branches, the subclavian vein and the internal jugular vein. Now, we don't only have the internal jugular vein, we have other versions of that. We have the external jugular vein, which is a branch of the subclavian vein. We have the anterior jugular vein, which is a branch of the external jugular vein. From the external jugular vein, we also have the suprascapular vein. Okay, so it's important to know the passage of the course of the internal jugular vein. The internal jugular vein will eventually go into the cranial cavity. See, here it is. It will go into the cranial cavity through an opening or through a foramen, and this is it. If you can see that better from here, this is called the jugular foramen for passage of the internal jugular vein into the cranial cavity. This foramen is formed by two bones, the occipital bone and also the temporal bone. Okay, so that's also about that. Yep. And now, of course, we've got further branches. By the way, what I'm saying for the right side also applies for the left side. So here, from the brachiocephalic vein, apart from having the two major branches, which were the subclavian and the internal jugular veins, we also have the inferior thyroid vein. Of course, this is the right one, and the left inferior thyroid vein comes from the left subclavian vein, of course, as you can expect. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the other thyroid veins. This is the middle thyroid vein, a branch of the internal jugular vein, and this is the superior thyroid vein, of course again a branch of the internal jugular vein. So these are called thyroid veins because they basically supply the blood drainage of the thyroid gland. Okay, okay. So now here are some other stuff. This is the common facial vein. Okay, just some major stuff. All right. So now let's talk about the aorta. Yeah. So as we said, this is the arch of aorta. We've got some branches from this guy. So this is an important note. If we cut this guy like that, this is the division of the right side, and this is the division of the left side. So here we've got only one main branch. Here we've got two main branches. So we can see that the arterial division actually differs from the right to the left side. It's not a big difference. It is one small difference, which I'm going to talk about now, inshallah. So this is the subclavian this is the brachiocephalic artery. We don't say right or left because we actually have this guy on the right side only. So from the brachiocephalic artery, we have two major branches, which is the subclavian artery and the common carotid artery. But if we go to the left side, we have got the subclavian artery and the common carotid artery directly from the arch of aorta. So from the left side, these two branches, they take off right from the arch of aorta, but to the right side, they branch off from the brachiocephalic artery, which branches off from the arch of aorta. So that's an important note. Now, let's go further, deeper, and talk about some more smaller things. So this is the subclavian artery. From this guy, we've got this branch, which is the sorry if I can get that. Yeah, the thyrocervical trunk. This is the thyrocervical trunk. It's a very small trunk, but in of itself has got some other branches. So this is the suprascapular artery. Now a little bit superior to that, we've got the transverse cervical artery. Right, it's basically transverse. Right, it's horizontal and it's in the neck. That's why it's a transverse cervical artery. And then we've got the inferior thyroid artery. Okay, this is the inferior thyroid artery, as you can see in there. Now from the inferior thyroid artery, we've got the ascending cervical artery, a branch of that, and we also have another branch of that, which is the inferior laryngeal artery. Okay, so now let's have a little bit more focus on the inferior thyroid artery. We talked about the inferior, middle, and superior thyroid veins, but now let's talk about its arterial supply. So this is the inferior thyroid artery, and we also have the superior thyroid artery. So this is the superior one, but we do not have a middle thyroid artery, by the way. But from the superior thyroid artery, we've got a branch which is called the cricothyroid artery, which can kind of, be resembling the middle thyroid vein, maybe just to memorize. Okay, so by the way, the superior thyroid artery branches off from the external carotid artery. So we're going to talk about that later on, because the common carotid artery will actually give off two major branches: the internal carotid artery and the external carotid artery. So the internal carotid artery will eventually pass through a foramen, or actually a canal, which is called the carotid canal. This is it. This is the carotid canal. It's in the temporal bone. See, this is the temporal bone, and it will eventually enter the cranial cavity as the internal jugular vein did. Okay, so now let's actually talk about the external carotid artery. So as we said, from this guy, we've got the superior thyroid artery, and the inferior thyroid artery actually came from the thyrocervical trunk, which in itself came from the right subclavian artery, and of course it's the same for the left side. Now that's good, but there are some more stuff to talk about. This is the facial artery. This is also a very important artery to know. See, here it is. It's actually in the anterior border of the masseter muscle, which is kind of in here. Okay, and so it's in close relationship to the common facial vein. Now here's an important thing. This is we've got the maxillary artery. Let's hide this guy. This is the parotid gland, by the way, and this is the parotid duct. But anyhow, let's hide these. Okay. So here, from the external carotid artery, we've got the maxillary artery. It's beneath the mandible, close to its head. This is head, or the condylar process of the mandible. So to see the maxillary artery more clearly, we have to hide this mandible. So this is the maxillary artery, a branch of the external carotid artery. So from the maxillary artery, there are many branches, but this is what we are actually more interested in. This is the middle meningeal artery. The middle meningeal artery will pass through a foramen in the skull. This is the foramen spinosum. To the right of, or actually here, this is the foramen ovale. these both foramina are situated in the sphenoidal bone. So this is the sphenoid bone, and of course we've got other foramina. By the way, we expect the foramen rotundum to be here, but actually we don't see that here. Why? Because it will go like that. See, if it was here, it will go like that to here, leading to the pterygopalatine fossa. So why do we call this the pterygopalatine fossa? Well, because this is the palatine bone, and this is the pterygoid plate of the sphenoid bone. So this fossa is basically called the pterygopalatine fossa. Okay, good. So as we said, the middle meningeal artery, which is a branch of the maxillary artery, will pass through the foramen spinosum, which is in the sphenoid bone, and it will go into the cranial cavity, but then it will give off two branches. So let's actually talk about that. By the way, I want to talk about two important landmarks. This is called the nasion. This is the nasion. It's basically a depression in the midline at the root of the nose. So that's the nasion. And then we've got the pterion. This guy is the pterion. This is the pterion. It's the point where the greater wing of the sphenoid meets the anterior inferior angle of the parietal bone. Okay, so this is the pterion. Now let's hide this parietal bone, and let's go back to the middle meningeal artery. Here it is, and let's fade the others. Now we see something really cool here. Let's go closer. Okay, so here this is the middle meningeal artery. It gives off two branches, the posterior branch and the anterior branch. So the anterior branch of the middle meningeal artery lies beneath the pterion. Okay, so that is also something cool to talk about. Now this was just about the major vessels and arteries and veins of the thorax and the neck that we need to know. Okay, now let's talk about some other landmarks. So I'd like to talk about the larynx. So let's get the respiratory system. Okay, all right. Actually, let's remove these other guys kind of here. Okay. Okay, so this is the larynx. All of that. This is the larynx, and this is the trachea. They are part of the respiratory system. However, the pharynx, which is this, the pharynx and the esophagus are part of the digestive system. Okay, so let's go back to here. Now, these two glands, the parotid gland and also the thyroid gland, are also considered part of the digestive system, because of course they've got some mechanisms which take part in that. Now, this is the hyoid bone. Of course, it has got the body, lesser horn and greater horn. Now, the body stands opposite the C3, the third cervical vertebra, and the upper border of the thyroid cartilage stands opposite the C4, the fourth cervical vertebra, and then the cricoid cartilage stands opposite the sixth cervical vertebra. Okay, so this is the thyroid membrane between the hyoid bone and the thyroid cartilage. Now, the thyroid membrane has got varying thickness, and it's thicker in the middle and lateral areas to form the median thyroid ligament and lateral thyroid ligament. Okay, and then we've got the thyroid cartilage. Of course, this guy also has some parts and surfaces. This is the oblique line. This is the left lamina, for example. This is the upper margin or the upper body, as we said. This is the superior horn, the inferior horn. Okay, and then we've got the cricoid cartilage. This is the cricoid cartilage. It's the only complete ring structure. If you hide this, it's the only complete ring structure in the airway. Okay, so between the thyroid cartilage and the cricoid cartilage, we've got ligaments. So this is the median and lateral cricothyroid ligaments. Okay, and then these are the tracheal cartilaginous rings, and between the tracheal cartilaginous rings and the cricoid cartilage, we've got a ligament which is called the cricotracheal ligament. All right. Now let's talk about the cricoid cartilage in exclusively. This is important because it's an important landmark in the neck. So, as we said, this stands opposite the C6, and it is at the junction of the larynx and the trachea. It is also at the level of the junction of the pharynx and the esophagus, and now it also stands at the level of the middle cervical sympathetic ganglion. Now let's actually get the nervous system for this. So here, okay, here it is. This is the middle cervical sympathetic ganglion. Of course, we know that this is the cervix, and this is the middle of the cervix, so that's why this is the middle cervical sympathetic ganglion. So, as you can see here clearly, that the cricoid cartilage is at the level of the middle cervical sympathetic ganglion. And another important note is that if we switch to here, now, by the way, this is a netter picture of the situation. Special thanks to him for providing these great looking photos for medical students. Now, let's just go ahead and talk about this guy. So, as we said, again, a review. This is the brachiocephalic trunk for the right side. From that, we've got the common carotid artery and the subclavian artery. From the subclavian artery, we've got the thyrocervical trunk. From there, we've got the suprascapular artery. We have the transverse cervical artery, and again, we have the inferior thyroid artery. From the inferior thyroid artery, of course, we've got the ascending cervical artery, and we also do have the inferior laryngeal artery. But we are more interested in the inferior thyroid artery right here. So, by the way, the cricoid cartilage is gonna be here, kind of. So we can see that this is the middle cervical ganglion, and this is where the inferior thyroid artery enters the thyroid gland. So we can see that the cricoid cartilage is at the level of the middle cervical sympathetic ganglion, and at the level where the inferior thyroid artery enters the thyroid gland. Now we can also see that more clearly maybe here. See, so this is the thyroid cartilage. This is the these are the cricothyroid ligaments, and so the cricoid cartilage will be kind of here, and of course again this is the inferior thyroid artery entering the. Another important landmark that I didn't want to forget is the superficial temporal artery. Now why is this important? Well, the pulsation of this guy can actually be felt right in front of the auricle. So this is the external acoustic meatus in the temporal bone, and the auricle would be here. So right in front of that we've got the superficial temporal artery. Now the superficial temporal artery is a continuation of the external carotid artery, and from the superficial temporal artery we've got a branch which is the transverse facial artery, but we have to remember that the facial artery itself is actually a branch of the external carotid artery. Now this is also the superficial temporal vein, which is the continuation of the retromandibular vein in this case.